Welcome to this PetroSkills overview of the importance of today's shale resource plays. My name is Ron Hinn. I'm Executive Vice President at PetroSkills and pleased to take just a little bit of time to share with you some of the insights that we're communicating to our clients globally relative to the shale play resources, particularly in the United States. This brief presentation will give you an overview of some of the opportunities and some of the technologies being applied across the world relative to shales. As you look at the opportunities for shales, clearly this is a changing resource space and one in which we have some tremendous potential here in the United States and globally. It's had some significant global impact on the crude oil and gas prices around the world, and this is something that plays dramatically into the economies of nations around the world, both for developed and developing countries. The presentation, some of the comments that I'm going to make is a brief one. It's actually excerpted out of a couple-day class that we provide to our clients, but we're going to focus on some of the key themes around gas pricing, some of the big plays in the United States, a little bit on the technologies being deployed, and some of the visioning that companies are taking forth within the shale plays. And then lastly, some of the benefits that both myself and each of you that are watching this webinar are going to gain from the shale play technologies and resources that are being developed. As we look at natural gas overall and its accumulations in the subsurface, this Energy Information Administration graphic kind of gives you a description of where natural gas accumulates. As we look through the different locations, we have our standard or conventional resource plays, such as your associated gas, which is tied to typically oil production, your non-associated gas, which is your dry gas wells, coal bed methane associated with the shallow coal resources, and then our tight gas. Tight gas is low permeability, which we'll describe in a moment what that means, but typically it's low permeability requiring stimulation. And that has been around for several decades now. The industry's been exploring those. It's only in the last decade that we have been advancing the technologies around the shales. And so this has opened up a whole new realm of technology and opportunities in this type of resource play. So we're dealing with shales, not the typical sedimentary producing formations such as the carbonates or the sandstones, but dealing with extracting gas from the shale itself, which typically has been our source rock. When you look at the size of the shale gas as it relates to the full resource base, we're talking upwards of 40+% of the U.S. production in 2007 was associated with the shales, and it's anticipated that this will grow to almost 65% by the year 2020. So it is a huge piece of the future resource base for, in this case, the United States. Many companies are sharing their view of the importance of the shale resources. This is an example and some statistics taken from the ExxonMobil Outlook for Energy. And it just shows the need for some of these new resource plays coming in. In this case, this is a very impactful graphic that shows that 75% of today's oil production is coming from reservoirs that were discovered before 1980, which means that in the last 30 years, those reservoirs that have been discovered are contributing about 25%. And it is the shale resource plays now, both for the gas and the liquids, that is adding some significant volumes to this resource base, which is a very mature resource base. Out of the same study, the Outlook for Energy, Exxon has shared that global energy demand and the future demand will be met by a changing resource base. And ExxonMobil in this case compares 2040 to 2010 relative to the type of fuel that will be supplying that energy demand. And you can see fuel all the way from the fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, to the hydro and geo, the renewables. Relative to the fossil fuels, though, you can see the significant increase on this graph of the supply that will come from the natural gas and from the oil. Much of that will be associated with the shale resource plays. As we look at the U.S. natural gas usage and its forecasts, This is a graphic that on the y-axis shows the U.S. gas consumption in trillion cubic feet. The projection is that it would grow from around 25 TCF in 2020 up to around 30 TCF by 2030. And you can see the usages and where those demands are going to be coming from. Both the industrial and electrical power are driving the majority of that demand. And again, the majority of this demand is going to be supplied in a big fashion by the shale resource plays. It's interesting as we look globally and some of the global companies that are coming to the United States to play in the shale trends. So we have companies such as Statoil and BHP Billiton, BP beginning to ply their trade within the shale resource plays, ExxonMobil making a major acquisition of cross timbers in the shale plays. As BP looks in their outlook 2030 to the importance of the shale plays, BP made a very important comment on this graphic. I just want to pull out one bullet point, and that's the fourth one on this graph, that states that in North America, that region has the potential to become energy self-sufficient by 2030, which if some of you are like me and have been in the industry for a long time, that's really unheard of that North America could become energy self-sufficient. Again, it's the shale resource plays that are driving this type of vision and opportunity in North America. In the context of resource plays, how important is the shales? ExxonMobil, in their analyst presentation in March of 2012, shared this graphic which describes their resource base by different types of resource plays. You can see that from the standpoint of ExxonMobil's reserve base, that the conventional reserves of hydrocarbons represented about 20% of their total reserve base. And it's the unconventionals, the heavy oils, the LNGs, the Arctic, and the deep water, that all of these requiring major investments, significant new technologies to be deployed, et cetera, that make up 75% of that resource base. And so it is these new technologies, and including the unconventionals, that are going to drive the growth in the future for many companies globally, including the super majors such as ExxonMobil. This is a visual of the shale plays within the U.S. put out by the Energy Information Administration. And you can see across the U.S., east of the Rockies and west of the Appalachians, there's significant resource plays that are underway. What's amazing about this graphic is that this is just in the past decade that these have grown. Had you looked back 3 years ago at this graphic by the EIA, the largest and most active shale resource play, currently the Eagle Ford, would have barely showed up on this plot. That's how fast these resource plays are developing. So significant presence from the north, up in the Bakken and North Dakota, to the east, the Marcellus and the Utica plays, down to South Texas in the Eagle Ford, the Barnett. And now we're seeing the onsets of new plays such as the Cline in the western portion of Texas, the Cline Shale. Shale gas, if you look at this graphic, again, will dominate the supply chain going forward into 2040. Again, in EIA statistics showing of that growth in demand, how much of that will be met by the shale gas. Most of the other resource plays are depleting. It is the shale gas that is growing to meet that U.S. demand with its output. An interesting little graphic here put out by a small company called LCI, but this graphic shows you the different resource plays as they've come online and the contribution of these resource plays over time. So this is dry gas coming from several different plays. The Barnett is the lowest color, it's in the gold. And you can see most recently we have the Haynesville and the Marcellus coming on with significant volumes. So again, significant growth since just 2007. So in the past 7 years, as I stated, much of the industry has been reshaped by this onset of the shale resource plays. And then relative to the tight oil production, we have the big plays coming on most recently, the Eagle Ford and the Bakken, which represent over half of the oil production coming from the shale oil plays as of 2013. Again, significant growth, particularly within the last 5 years subsequent to 2008. And from the oil standpoint, as you look at oil projections and where oil production will grow, the United States probably within the next year will become the #1 producer of liquid hydrocarbons, again on the backs of tight oil. So you're looking at production on the order of 8 to 10 million barrels per day, growing over the next 5 years within the United States. So significant growth is forecast for the tight oils. Then lastly, if you look at one state that's been changed significantly by the shale oil play, it's North Dakota. North Dakota was rapidly approaching 1 million barrels a day of oil production, all associated with the Bakken play, one of the hottest plays within the U.S. region. And you can see that dramatic growth since 2008. North Dakota now ranks as the 3rd largest producing state within the U.S. So there's a significant dynamic that has changed relative to commodity pricing because of these large volumes of natural gas that are coming online. Historically, oil and natural gas have moved, their pricing has moved in parallel to one another based on the BTU content. Just pause for a moment, a little technology insight, but 1 barrel of crude oil contains approximately 5.7 million BTUs of energy, a British thermal unit. If you look at 1 MCF of natural gas, that contains about 1 million BTUs of energy. So if you were to have an energy equivalent, the industry uses a rule of thumb of about 6 to 1. So 6 MCF of natural gas will give you about the equivalent of 1 barrel of crude oil. Again, up until about 2008, these prices had moved in parallel one to another. So you could take the oil price, divide it by 6, and you'd approximate what the natural gas price was. However, with the onset of the significant gas volumes, there's been a significant pressure put on the natural gas prices, causing that lockstep movement on a BTU basis between the oil and natural gas to separate. Natural gas now is selling on the order of $4 per MCF, while crude oil has been priced at about, running currently in October 2013, around $100 per MCF. If you were to use that rule of thumb, that would say if gas is at $4 per MCF, then the equivalent oil price should be on the order of $24, $25 per barrel. But oil is at almost $100 per barrel. So you ask yourself, well, what's happening there? And the factors that are influencing that are all about supply and demand. So in the United States, we view natural gas as a regional commodity. Gas competes for markets within North America, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, and it can move through pipelines between those countries. Oil, however, is a commodity that's determined by world market demand and supply. So we have some 86 to 87 million barrels a day of demand around the world and about 85 to 86 million barrels of supply. And that supply can move around the world in tankers, and so we have a balance between that on a global basis. And so if something happens around the world, the acronym or the phrase that we usually say is that if someone gets sick in the world relative to oil production, then the rest of the world catches the cold also. That is because the world's oil markets are interconnected, whereas the natural gas market is much more regional. So in the U.S. is benefiting from significant reduction in natural gas prices, not on the producer side, but on the consumer side. And it's caused a huge economic influx within the U.S. We see lots of industries repatriating back to the U.S. because of this, coming into U.S. markets because of the low feedstock prices, et cetera. And it's brought on a huge economic growth engine for many, many states within this country. So that is a dynamic. One of the influences of the shale onset, particularly around natural gas, is that disconnect on a BTU basis between the hydrocarbon oil and the hydrocarbon natural gas price. But on a positive side, since 2008, jobs, some 600,000 jobs created, probably another 250,000 to 300,000 jobs will be created by 2015. It's estimated that for those who are in the U.S., citizens like myself, we probably have per household an additional $1,000 per year of spending money that comes into our pockets by virtue of the reduction in natural gas prices. So that could be for your home heating or your electricity, the power generation much of the power generation in the U.S. is from natural gas, and so those electricity prices have benefited the consumer because of that reduction. Again, to the tune of about $1,000 per year. So each of us as citizens have benefited from this. And then if you look at the economy and the tax revenues associated with the shale, some $30 billion per year has been added. So a significant impact in the world markets for supply, the commodity prices, and then economic impact to consumers here within the U.S. Just pause for a moment and step back and take a look at some of the technical aspects of the shales. We understand the economic now and a little bit of the markets from the supply and demand standpoint. Just spend just a brief few minutes talking about what characterizes a shale and what differentiates it from some of the typical conventional resources that we have. Well, shales themselves were historically referred or believed to be and referred to as our source rocks. Shales were the source, and we had other sedimentary rocks which provided what geologists refer to as the trap and the locale for where the hydrocarbons could accumulate. In fact, shales oftentimes were also viewed as the seal, which would help contain the hydrocarbons within the other sedimentary rocks, the sandstones or the carbonates. In this case, however, the shale now becomes both the source, where the hydrocarbons are generated, it is the trap, where the hydrocarbons are held, and it provides the seal. It all becomes all three of those. And so it's a unique play to think about interacting with a depositional environment, in this case the shales, that capture all three of those aspects. Shales are very, very low permeability. Permeability refers to the ability of the fluids and or gases to be mobilized and to be mobile throughout that matrix of the sediment, in this case the shales. So you really cannot see much of any gas or oil flowing through the shales themselves. However, the shales do have some, in the productive shales will have some natural fracturing. We'll describe that in a moment and why that particular characteristic is important. Shales have low estimated ultimate recovery relative to the oil or the gas in place, just because of the nature of the low perm environment that they're in. And the economics for operators in the shales is highly dependent on the types of completions. So we know that in the shales we need both the horizontal drilling, the long laterals that are drilled through the shales, and we also need the hydraulic fracturing technology to allow us to unlock some of the resources that are contained within that shale bed. I have a description here, a nice little table that kind of gives you a context for the types of permeability, and rather than share with you the numerical values, just show you through some general nomenclature how we characterize how tight these shale reservoirs are. If you think about a typical conventional reservoir, think about a beach sand, something like you'd see down at Galveston or on a beach in Florida. And that might be on the order of 100 to 1,000 millidarcies of permeability. We move to that tight gas sand, which I mentioned earlier we've been producing from for some 15 to 20 years. And that might be more like a building stone or a brick that you might use in construction. That would be on the order of 1/10 of a millidarcy or 1/100th of a millidarcy. Now we move into the very tight shales, and you're moving down into the range of 0.00001 millidarcies, something on the order of granite. It is very, very tight, very, very difficult to mobilize any fluids or gases to move through that type of low permeability formation. And so you can see just through this graphic that we're dealing with a very, very difficult sediment to mobilize the hydrocarbon resources out of. And the key is, what are the technologies that can help unlock those from that rock matrix? Not all shales are productive. Shales have different aspects to them. The key to an appropriate shale, though, is it's more of, is that shale ductile or is that shale considered to be more brittle? You put ductile on one end. Ductile is more of how malleable is it, what is the clay concentration in that. And when you look at the brittleness of a clay, you have to ask yourself, if it's a low clay content, is there more of the very brittle minerals contained within that shale, such as the quartzes and the feldspars and the carbonates. And it is the brittleness which makes a shale, the higher brittleness shales, which make them susceptible and amenable to more of the hydraulic fracturing technology. And to the extent that we can identify where the more brittle shales are and put our lateral, our horizontal well through those shales, those are the ones that have the higher probability of being successful producing wells. As geologists look at where the more ductile rocks are typically deposited, they're typically a little closer to the source area, and the cleaner or the more brittle shales are typically more in the marine environments per this graphic. I won't go into a lot of the details around other characteristics besides the depositional environment that are important, apart from mentioning that, and you can view this on typically any type of Google search, but you can look up TOCs, the total organic content, and also thermal maturity. Those are two key issues that relate to the propensity for a shale to be a producing reservoir rock. Have a nice little picture here of the Eagleford Shale. This is outcropping in central Texas. But if you notice in this picture, it gives you a visual of a very laminar type formation. Shales are characterized by the laminar nature of their deposition. But you can see that also it's highly fractured. And if you can imagine, if you were to come in and you were to step on that shale, you'd see the brittle nature of that. And it's this type of characteristics. Again, the lower clay content, although you can see the clay in this, it's the lower clay content and the brittleness which enables the Eagleford to be such a productive and positive reservoir rock as far as being very amenable to the hydraulic fracturing technology. If you were to look under an SEM image or a spectral map, you could see that you do have clays that are represented within that Eagleford as far as the mineralogy goes, but you also have within that, you have a significant amount of quartz and some calcites that are in that. You have the organics, which are the source rock for the hydrocarbons that are contained within those shales. So a high propensity of non-clays within this make for a highly fracturable and potentially a rock that you can easily mobilize some of the hydrocarbons contained therein. As we look at the types of gas that we mobilize in the shale resource plays, we have really two types that we characterize, and the reservoir engineers, as they look at this, they capture it as either adsorbed gas or free gas. Free gas would be typical to the typical calculation that we use in conventional plays on relative to the gas contained within the fracture system and the pore space within the shales themselves, and that can be calculated on a volumetric basis. But in the shales themselves, with those organics that are contained, you also have natural gas that's entrained upon the organic material itself. And this gas, in order to estimate how much gas is associated with that type of in-place number within the formation itself, you need to use some special technology, and the industry refers to this as Langmuir isotherms, but isotherms which give you a prediction of how much of that adsorbed gas you can liberate as you drop the pressure down. In the combination then between the adsorbed gas that is liberated with the pressure drop and the free gas that's mobilized out of the pore space and the fracture system, you have your total gas that is produced. In this graphic that I'm showing here, we have 7 different plays, shale plays, that are shown, and you can see the relative percentages of the free gas and the adsorbed gas from each of those plays on a BCF or billion cubic feet per section basis. Kind of an interesting graphic to show you that a shale play is not a shale play. They're all different. They all have different levels of gas in place and absorbed gas. Some are normal pressured, some are over pressured. So each play in and of itself becomes unique, and there's different technologies that are applied in accordance with the nature of the gas that's in place within those reservoirs. In the last 5 years, in addition to the Bakken play, the Eagle Ford has taken on significant interest within the operators in southwestern Texas. The Eagle Ford is a unique formation. It actually outcrops, as you can see in this EIA graphic, in central Texas. That's represented by the black running through the central Texas. And then it dives structurally to the southeast. From there, reaching a significant depth by the time you get to the Gulf of Mexico. The Eagle Ford itself, as it dives deeper, becomes the gas within the Eagle Ford becomes much drier. And as operators have begun to explore within the Eagle Ford, most of their activities have been in the central portion of the play, represented by the gold, which is some of your liquids-rich gas, and then moving more towards the oil-dominated production in the green areas shown within this graphic. So again, just from a standpoint of what do you find at depth, you would find more of the drier gas in the Eagle Ford in the southeastern portion of the play, and then the wetter gas moving to liquids as you back up towards central Texas. So a significant play that's been developed and will continue to be developed over the next decade in the central and southeast Texas area. As we think about the types of technologies that are applied, I mentioned the hydraulic fracturing. Hydraulic fracturing is highly dependent on the type of clays that you're going to encounter. And so again, you see on this graphic here between the ductile nature of the shales or the brittle nature, you would design your hydraulic fracture treatment differently. So engineers, as they step back and they look at what type of fracture treatment, what type of gel system am I going to use, or am I just going to use a slick water type system? How much proppant am I going to put in to prop up that fracture, etc. That's all dependent on the mineralogy of the shales that you're trying to produce from and stimulate. And so in this graphic, again, just an idea of why we have a wide variety. It is highly dependent on the mineralogy of the rock. As we step outside of the United States, it's clear that the shale plays have enormous potential in basins around the world. The United States has been leading out in the last decade with this technology. Certainly interest exists around the world, from Europe into China, down into Latin America, Australia, in the shale plays. And much of this technology now will move globally around the world. So it's exciting to see this being deployed, the reserve additions that are being made. There's lots to learn yet in this space. Certainly the areas of the total ultimate recovery is yet to be seen, as we're in the early stages of life for much of the production globally. But over the next 10 to 15 years, a significant amount of learnings will be accomplished, and it's anticipated significant growth will occur globally, not just in the United States, as a result of the shale resource plays being developed. It is an exciting time. As I mentioned, opportunity abounds in all segments. We anticipate that this is going to result for North America in energy independence, which is an exciting statement for those citizens living within the North American area. Certainly it is a lower carbon footprint from the standpoint of emissions when you look at the natural gas. It's driving significant economic growth around the United States currently. The question is, how will your company benefit? If your company is a user of the hydrocarbon energy, certainly there's going to be reduced utility costs, energy costs for your company, so there is an opportunity for your profits to increase because of that. If you're a consumer of this, you're benefiting from your lower electrical prices, and certainly on the liquid side, your lower gasoline transportation costs, etc. So there's benefits that abound, certainly from an economic standpoint for countries and for individuals as citizens. Shale is truly a game changer in our industry. We at Petroskills appreciate your interest and the time that you've given to us to view this brief review of the shale play resources, and would gladly welcome your calls if you'd like to learn more about some of our teaching and training services. We thank you for your time and wish you the best.